channel, I hope you're all well. Sorry I didn't upload last week, it was a little bit of a manic week, we got a new puppy. However, I'm back today with a different special video. Now I say this every single week that today's a little bit of a different video, but today really is. It's a true crime story. Now before we go into the video, I just want to say I do not mean any harm by anyone that I speak about in this video. It is just literally just retelling a story. So this video is already going to be quite long, so as normal, if you like what I do, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, follow me on Instagram, and let's get straight into this video. So today's video actually dates back to 1986 in a small town called Greenock in Scotland, just outside Glasgow. Now back in 1986 there wasn't really much to shout about. It was just a small town where everyone kind of knew everyone. Crime rate was pretty normal with the odd petty crime here and there. But on Monday the 2nd of June 1986 that was to change. A local man from around the Greenock area went to a small lane just off the side of a residential street where he'd parked his car the night before. When he arrived there about 7:30, when he immediately walked into the lane, he was met by a naked dead body. So obviously this man then called the police. The police back in 1986, each kind of officer would have their own bit of patch of land that they would patrol and kind of keep safe. The police officer that had control of this patch was called Alan Stewart. Alan Stewart had been in the force for quite a while now, quite a few years, so he's quite seasoned and he knew what he was kind of doing. On this particular day, he was called whilst he was at home with his then fiancée. Now, when police talk, they talk in code, and he was told that he's going to a code 4-4. Now, like I said, he'd been a police officer for a few years now, but he'd never been called to a 4-4. It wasn't until he looked into his book that he realised that a 4-4 meant murder, and this would be the first murder that Alan Stewart had ever been involved in. Alan Stewart then made his way to the crime scene, which, when he got there, just like the gentleman before him, he found a lifeless dead body. Now, he was only a patrol officer, so he then had to call his senior staff, and senior members of the police force then joined him at the scene. When they got there, they decided to put blankets all along the fence and over the body itself. This was because directly opposite the lane was a residential street, and in the residential street, terraced houses, which were 4 stories high. So the residents only needed to look out their window when they woke up in the morning and they'd see the crime scene. Once they'd done this, they started to kind of look around the crime scene and see if they could identify this lady that was there. She was naked, she had marks around her neck, and she had a bruised eye. When pathologists got there, they declared that she'd probably been hit at least once in the face and then strangled. The fact that she was naked, police decided that it was a sexually motivated attack. Now, this was 1986. There wasn't anything such as DNA, there wasn't anything that they could kind of do to identify the body there and then. There was also no handbag there, so there was no kind of wallet with her address or anything like that. So all the police had to go on was what they had in front of them. Now, they had her face. There was also a neatly folded pile of clothing next to her, which obviously belonged to her. In this clothing, there was a white and black dress and a navy jacket. So whilst some of the team stayed and carried on working on the crime scene, some of the officers went door to door to try and find who would know this lady who was wearing a black and white dress and navy jacket. One of those officers was Alan, and Alan decided to start with the house directly opposite the lane. This house belonged to the Doyle family. Lived here was Jack and Maureen Doyle, mum and dad, and then son John Doyle and daughter Elaine Doyle. When he knocked on the door, he was met by both Jack and Maureen, who'd already kind of seen what was going on, and Alan explained to them that they'd found a young lady's body laying naked, and the only thing they had to go by was what she's wearing. This is when Maureen interrupted him and said, "My daughter didn't come home from the disco last night." With that, Alan asked, "What was your daughter wearing?" Maureen explained that she was wearing a black dress with white bits on it and a navy jacket. That's when Alan discovered that he was standing in front of the parents of the deceased young girl who lay just 40 yards away from her home. Alan took the Doyles into the home to take a formal statement. The Doyles started to explain about Elaine and how she was a young, bubbly girl and she was only 16 years old. They explained that she had a small job down at the local jewellery shop and she was just enjoying life. That particular night she was going to a local disco. Now her father knew she was underage, he knew she was only 16 years old, but he always said, "I'd rather know where she was than her sneak off and go anyway and me not know where she was." So that was okay in his eyes. When she left that night, Elaine told her dad that she was off to the disco, and her dad said, as he always would, be careful and watch yourself. She told her mum Maureen that she'd be home by 1 a.m. Elaine was going to the disco with her friend Lynn Ryan. So after speaking and taking a statement from the Doyles, the police headed over to Lynn Ryan. When they got to Lynn Ryan explained, yes, she did go to the disco with Elaine. Nothing unusual happened. They were at the disco. They left the disco. They went to the burger hut like they always did, and then they travelled home. And when they came to a split in the road, one road led to Elaine's house and one road led to Lynn's house. And like they always did, they said goodbye and split off. Little did Lynn know that was the last time she was ever to see Elaine alive. Whilst police were talking with Lynn, Jack Doyle had spoken to the newspapers. Now, Maureen Doyle was in such a state that she didn't take part in this. She was heard next door, wailing in grief. However, Jack answered the questions of the newspaper. He hoped by putting this in the newspaper that it'd hit the next morning and anyone that would have seen Elaine that day might be able to shed light on her murder. So the next morning, the news hit and the whole of Greenock was completely shocked that a young 16-year-old girl had been murdered just 40 yards away from her home. As the days drew on, the police just started to question everybody that went to the disco that night, started to speak to everyone in and around the area that Elaine was murdered in, but they couldn't seem to find any. A few weeks later, nothing was really happening. There were a few kind of rumours going around that so-and-so saw this person running away from the scene and this person saw this person, but there was nothing solid that the police could go on. Some locals even decided that maybe the murderer was just passing through the town, maybe a lorry driver or someone that had just visited the town for the weekend. A few weeks later, Elaine's handbag was found just a mile away from her home, burnt outside the local library. This injected fear back into the community, as to them, maybe the murderer was living amongst them. Unfortunately, the bag didn't really give them much more evidence, and despite the newspaper putting an article in the newspaper every single day to keep it at the forefront of their minds, that daily article became weekly, it then became monthly, and before we knew it, it was just every year on the anniversary of Elaine Doyle's death. It was years on, and the family of Elaine Doyle just kind of learnt to deal with the grief of their daughter being murdered. They just carried on with life, and they had the funeral, and things just carried on. On the 25th anniversary of Elaine Doyle's murder, the police decided to launch a cold case investigation. There was a whole team of 40 detectives that would then take over the top floor of the Glasgow headquarters police station, and they would reignite the case of Elaine Doyle, but this time calling it Operation Evergreen. Now, back in 1986, they didn't have computers, they didn't type reports, they would literally write statements down. So you can imagine this top floor in Glasgow headquarters being full of evidence. One bit of evidence that they started with was a tape, and not a tape recording or anything like that, literally a bit of tape. Now, back in 1986, they didn't have things such as DNA, and they didn't have so much scientific evidence. But what they would do is take bits of tape, stick them to the human or the object that they're trying to find clues of, and then hopefully materials of that would be on the tape, and they'll be able to match it to different materials, such as a jumper or things like that. Unfortunately, in 1986, the only thing they found on this tape were the fibres from the blanket that were used to cover her up, and nothing much more. But it's 25 years on, and DNA was understood so much more now, so the team decided to send this bit of tape off for DNA testing. Not only did this DNA come back, it came back as male, and the male would have been aged 16 to 34 at the age of Elaine's murder. So police started to now go around and speak to every single person that they took statements from back in 1986, and asked every single male for a voluntary DNA sample. Now, lots of people did this, and they didn't even argue it, but unfortunately, nothing came back. Police were kind of back to square one, but they knew they had the DNA of Elaine's murderer, and they weren't giving up. So they went through all of the statements again, when they found a note from a police officer in their notebook, which said TIE, John Dougherty. Now, TIE standard for Trace, Interview, Eliminate, but there was nothing else, so they decided to look into this further. They started to search all of the John Doughertys in the Greenock area. They came back with 20 different John Doughertys. So by going through statements, birth certificates, death certificates, addresses, they were able to distinguish just one John Dougherty that they were interested in. They decided to pay John Dougherty a visit. He actually lived just a mile away from the place that Elaine Doyle was murdered, in a flat with his partner and his young daughter. When they arrived, they asked if they could take a voluntary sample and explained what they were doing. John Dougherty gave this sample and he didn't even batter an eyelid. He was fine with it. They took a sample of DNA from his cheek. A few days later, the DNA sample came back and it was a match for John Dougherty. A really strong match. Police didn't want to show their hand too quickly, so they didn't go and arrest John straight away. They decided to question everyone that was around John Dougherty in the days of the murder of Elaine Doyle. They would go and ask people that went to the disco with him. They would go and ask people that knew him now. They would talk to people, but in a real kind of unofficial way, because they didn't want to let anyone know that they had potentially found the murderer. It was also found that John Dougherty had no criminal background back when at the time of the murder, but also now, which was a little bit strange. They spent the next few months making sure that their case was watertight. John Dougherty would have been 21 years old at the time of the murder. He had a normal life, he had normal friends, and there wasn't anything that strange about him. And even now, like I said, he had a partner, he had a young family, and he was been living in Greenock the whole 25 years. One witness that the police spoke to was a gentleman that was at the disco in 1986. At the time, he had told police there was a guy that was following Elaine all around the disco. He remembers him because he had what he called starry eyes. When police questioned him again 25 years later, his statement was the same. Police went back to this guy when they found out that John Dougherty's DNA was found on Elaine's body, and without telling him said, "If you were to see this guy again, would you be able to point him out?" The guy said yes. So the police showed him lots of different photos of lots of different men, including John Dougherty, and without hesitation, the guy picked John Dougherty. On March 22nd, 2013, police arrived back at John Dougherty's home, where they arrested him for the murder of 16-year-old Elaine Doyle. John Dougherty was really calm. He continued to say that he was innocent and he didn't know how he was going to help the police because he hadn't done anything. Police started questioning Dougherty for hours and hours, going through all of his different statements that he'd given, and he continued to say the same thing. "I don't know what else to tell you. There's nothing I can do to help you." Then police dropped the bombshell that they'd found his DNA on Elaine's body the night she died. He didn't have much to come back at. In June 2014, the 50-day trial started for John Dougherty. Hundreds of witnesses took to the stand to give evidence against him. The main evidence pushed by the prosecution was the DNA found on Elaine Doyle's body, and that of the witness who said about the starry eyes. After the 50-day trial, it was time for the jury to give their verdict. It came back as a majority that John Dougherty was guilty for the murder of 16-year-old Elaine Doyle. On August 5th, 2014, John Dougherty was sentenced to life imprisonment. The whole of Greenock was relieved, but no one more so than the family of the Doyles. Unfortunately, in 2012, Jack Doyle, the father of Elaine Doyle, actually passed away from cancer, so he never actually got to see justice for his daughter. However, his wife Maureen and son John did get to see it. John Doyle, Elaine Doyle's brother, said, "There's no winners in this, just losers. I feel sorry for his family, but I do not feel sorry for him." John Dougherty later then appealed, not only for his innocence, but also to be retrialled, but this was denied. So that is the end of Elaine Doyle's murder case. What do you guys, how would you feel if there was a murder and it took 30 years to figure it out in your town? It's quite a scary time. But I think that's why we're so lucky that we've got DNA evidence and things nowadays. Crimes get solved quicker. But I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. If you want to see more true crime videos, please just let me know. Give me some ideas in the comments. There is a few that I'd like to do, but I thought I'd just try it out and see how you guys find it. If you do like what you see, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Bye!